Our guest is James Meredith, the first Negro student admitted to the University of Mississippi, who has graduated from there last year with a degree in political science. He leaves the United States shortly for 3 years, first to travel through the Middle East and Africa, and then to study at Ibadan at the university in Nigeria. We'll have the first question now from Georgiana O'Kane of the New York World Telegram.
Mr. Meredith, we've seen new violence erupting in the South. An extremist Negro leader has issued what amounts to a call for arms. Do you see a wave of violence ahead?
I don't know if you're very accurate when you say an extremist Negro has called for violence. I think perhaps it is the white power structure that is calling for violence.
Sir, I was just referring to Malcolm X urging Negroes to form rifle clubs and to protect themselves.
Well, I wasn't familiar with that. I was familiar with Mr. X's break with the others of his group, but I was not familiar with this call. I think this is a very serious matter, and personally, of course, I don't think it's much of a secret that I'm not a very strong advocate of nonviolence. It's not to imply that I advocate violence, but I do advocate every citizen protecting his life and property, certainly his family.
Well, would you agree that rifle clubs, as suggested by Malcolm X, are a good idea?
Well, I don't know, really. I couldn't answer that. But I don't know if this would be needed. The Negro already has a rifle. In the South particularly, there's a lot of hunting going on. This is not, arms is not unusual in this country. This is one of our methods of life.
Do you foresee that the civil rights demonstrations are going to erupt more and more into violent demonstrations?
Well, I see little chance of anything else with people taking the position they are, such as the mayor of Jacksonville. There's certainly the Negro is not going to forever remain in his present subservient position. I certainly wouldn't advocate it.
Gay Pauley, Women's Editor, United Press International.
Mr. Meredith, a dispatch in a recent New York Times has said that the increased militancy of Negroes has triggered a counter-reaction among whites. Do you think that the Negro is moving too rapidly in the civil rights fight?
Well, I've been unable to see very much where he's moving at all.
You think he's getting nowhere? Well, what course does he pursue then if he's not getting anywhere with it?
Well, I think this is a grave question, and most of, I've spoken, lectured at colleges and universities throughout this country for the past 6 months, and it has been my dominant position that this question is not only a Negro question, and we should not only look to the Negro for an answer, but this is a total American question.
Yes, but the dispatch refers to the counter-reaction among whites, a resentment, as it were.
Well, there's no counter among whites. You see, it's always been this way with whites. The real problem in this country is not Negro civil rights, but the real problem is the Negroes' fight to maintain special rights. I mean, the whites' fight to maintain special rights for themselves. This is what the heart of the issue is.
Well, this dispatch mentions that the counter-reaction is setting in among even the more liberal whites.
Mm-hmm. Well, personally...
Did you feel it when you were on tour?
I'm in a very big fight over in Washington now with one of these so-called liberal whites. And I think they might prove to be less sincere in really looking for a solution to this problem than such men as Wallace and Barnett.
Mm-hmm. Could you name your liberal, quote, unquote, in Washington for us?
Well, I think everyone will soon know who he
is. You're not going to identify him for us, hmm? I would like to go to another area. I would like to ask whether you believe in the school boycott, Mr.
Well,
Meredith.
I have always taken the position that the best way of tackling a problem locally is to be decided by those who are most directly affected by it. I do agree to this. I agree that in each case there's a very serious problem that affects the Negro very greatly. I feel that he does have a right to indicate to the public and to the nation and the world that this problem exists and that something should be done about it. Exactly how he should do it, I never say. I think the people in the local areas are best qualified to determine exactly what action.
Representative Adam Clayton Powell has said to Negroes, don't hesitate to use your children to win integration for schools. Do you approve of that?
Well, it would depend on what level you're saying use them. I certainly agree that students, as students, have rights above what even the adults might have to indicate their dissatisfaction or their desire for better things. I personally have always been and still am opposed to the direct use of children and women where there's a chance of violence. Personally, I could never participate in a situation where my women are being kicked around, knocked around, or my children, because I believe in the American way. And certainly I would not tolerate this sort of thing in any movement I'm involved with.
Mr. Meredith, you just said you believe in the American way. Dick Gregory, I believe you know him, has said, I am not an entertainer first. I am not an American first. Above all else, first I am a Negro. What is your position?
Well, I've always considered myself an American first, on the condition that all American citizens are entitled to certain rights and privileges, and on the further condition that since I do not enjoy all of these, I can use every resource at my command to see that the day comes that I and all of the others who don't enjoy these do enjoy them.
Kay Pauling.
Mr. Meredith, you've said that intolerance and bigotry among your own people are endangering the civil rights movement. I would like, if you could, to give us some specific instances of intolerance and bigotry among the Negroes.
Well, we would not exclude this. I mean, to make this exclusively Negroes. Power is a thing that all people cherish, and certainly to become a leader of any note also means that you become one with power.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly I am very firmly convinced that a very large number of the people, the Negro elites, who are shouting the loudest for rights, are really in fact working in other ways to really not see the thing that they're shouting about come about.
What do you mean by the Negro elite, Mr. Meredith?
Well,
Can you be more specific on that for us?
You can refer to it as the middle class, certainly the upper middle class. We got to remember this. Segregation and discrimination benefited both. It might have benefited 90% of the white, but at the same time, it also benefited at least 10% of the Negro.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the factor that is a very difficult factor to deal with.
I'm not sure that I understand you, Mr. Meredith. In what way did it benefit the 10% of the Negro?
Well, you take most any, practically every Negro family that's a leading family in this country. It became so because of the system of segregation and discrimination. Each one of the congressmen that we have in Washington is there as a result, the direct result of segregation and discrimination. I'm not saying that these people like this now. I'm saying that this is the fact of the matter.
Turning for a moment to a statement that you once made, you recently said you don't agree with some of the policies of the leading Negro rights groups. Specifically, where do you part company from them?
Well, I had an old Jewish fella out in California when I was a great celebrity, I suppose. People were all around, and he was a very old man, and he called me off to the side and said he wanted to talk to me. And he told me that don't let all of this, whatever it was he called it, get you too far afield. And he went on to tell me that how some years ago he would drive through this country and see signs in the window saying no Jews. And he went on to tell me that what the Jews did was went down in Miami Beach and bought the whole thing and then even allowed us to come in. And so he didn't say what he meant by that. He just implied a lot of things.
Now, I take it that you are saying, on the one hand, that the Negro rights groups are pushing too hard, and yet, just a few minutes ago, you said that you felt that if necessary, nonviolence should be used to press the rights groups. I mean, to press for rights. I'm confused about your position on how fast, how hard to work for civil rights.
Well, personally, this doesn't mean anything to me. I, in the first place, do not recognize any American, including white, as being entitled to any right that I'm not entitled to. I do recognize the fact that because of certain conditions, particularly the one of force, I am prevented from enjoying some of my rights. But I never grant the right to anyone that I don't have.
Do you feel that the civil rights groups are working hard enough for you?
Well, in the first place, it's my contention that if all of the civil rights groups were able to be totally effective, there would still be 90% of the problem left. That's my position. That we cannot call upon or expect any civil rights group to solve this problem. The biggest thing they can do is point up this problem. This country is populated predominantly by American whites, and there's no formula. An organization could come up with a perfect formula. If the majority in this country didn't buy it, it could not be put into effective play.
In just a moment, we'll have more questions for our guest, James Meredith. We'll be right back. Question now from Gay Pauley for our guest, James Meredith.
Mr. Meredith, do you feel that civil rights leaders have exploited you?
No, I don't think that would be possible. Certainly, anyone that came along at the very time that I did, and developments that did occur, certainly this would cause some frustration among leaders, because it is, of course, a well-known fact that anytime anyone's name becomes very well known, it carries with it a certain amount of other things, and of course that is a threat. I don't think there's any necessary active misuse, intentional.
Mm-hmm. But there has been exploitation of the Meredith name.
Up to a certain point, but I think that we effectively stopped it.
I'm wanting you to look back a little bit, if you will, this morning. Would you enroll again at Ole Miss if you had it to do over?
Well, of course, enrolling at Ole Miss was, of course, not very important to me. It was only a part, and a small part of a much bigger objective.
Why were you selected?
Well, I been trying to find that out from God, but he hasn't instructed me yet exactly why.
Well, was that any particular group backing you, your enrollment there? Was this a free decision on your part?
Well, the entire Negro group, I think, and a very large segment of the other group. There was no necessary immediate connection with any group. The most dominant group that I was connected with was a school group at Jackson State College, which I was attending. This was the most significant group in my total success and development.
What do you think your enrollment at Ole Miss accomplished, besides the fact that you integrated one university? What do you think overall was accomplished for the Negro cause?
Well, I agree with Governor Barnett. I didn't integrate the school. But
Well, you were first man there.
that's not integration. I think that perhaps the biggest result, if any, that could come from that is pointing up the real problem. I think that most Americans knew that there was a bad situation in Mississippi, but I think very few really knew how strong the feeling was and to what extent the people would go.
Mr. Meredith, you are now leaving the United States to go to Nigeria for a law degree. I understand that you have an application to the law school of the University of Mississippi. Have you heard from that school?
Not
way or the other?
formally. I've heard from it through my private sources, but not.
They have not
formally.
notified you formally of either acceptance or rejection?
No.
May I ask you, you've studied at the university under the most extreme difficulties with troops around and violence and hostility. Were your grades sufficient to let you enroll in the University of Mississippi Law School now?
Well, I had an A- average in my field. I imagine that should qualify me to go to most in school.
Mr. Meredith, you have said, I'm quoting, "I can never, as a Negro, say I have no resentments." Now, do you say this based on your experience at the University of Mississippi, or did you always feel that way ever since you were an adult?
Well, perhaps since before I was an adult.
Was that since you first were aware of your color, that it's different from other Americans?
Yes, and it's very significant. I was 16 years old before I recognized this fact. Up until that time, it was more or less like a football team, and you're on one team and someone else is on the other. But I had the occasion to visit the North, and on my return, I was on the train. And when I left Chicago, I was on a half-empty car with plenty of seats. When I got to Memphis, Tennessee, they told me I had to move. And when I went, finally, they forced me into the other car. You couldn't even get in the hallway. And, of course, the other car was empty. And I cried for a long time on that issue.
Mr. Meredith, I ask you this because you're an intelligent person. This one experience, was that truly sufficient for you to indict people of a different color?
I don't know what you mean by indict. I think...
Well, again, I go back to the word resentment then. Is it specifically because of that one experience?
I don't resent any individual. I don't resent dislike Governor Barnett, anyone else. What I do resent is my being a second-class citizen, inferior, and I don't mean by biological means. I mean in fact, and I am in fact second in this country.
In just a moment, we'll have more questions for our guest, James Meredith, and then we'll be right back. We'll have a question now from Catherine Mackin of the New York Journal-American, delayed en route from Washington, D.C. Go ahead, Cassie.
Mr. Meredith, of the announced Republican candidates for the presidential election in November and President Johnson himself, which do you think merits the Negro vote?
Neither. I think the Negro vote will be greatly determined on what the Attorney General decides to do.
What do you mean by that? Could you explain?
Well, I just think that whatever
you
he
mean whether or
decides
not he'll
to
run
do,
for vice president?
No, whatever it is he decides to do.
Run for president?
Well, whatever it is.
Well, what do you think he might decide to do?
Well, I don't know, but
In other words, do you think the Negro people would follow Robert F. Kennedy? with their vote in November?
I think so.
Mr. Meredith, when you come back in 3 years from Nigeria, do you plan to enter politics yourself?
Well, I'm already somewhat involved in politics. I'm a campaign director for Frank Reeves, who is the only Negro Democratic National Committeeman for his reelection.
Would you like to run for office yourself?
Well, I've never known any politician that ever said whether he wanted to run for office himself.
You will have a law degree when you return. Will you be able to practice law here with a
No, I
Nigerian degree?
am studying government in Nigeria.
Oh, I'm sorry. The quotation from you that I read was that you were studying government and law. You're not planning to become a lawyer, is that correct?
I think I might be too old for that.
Mr. Meredith, have you ever been asked to join at any time the Black Muslim movement?
Not directly. I've talked with the head of that movement, but just talked.
Would you if asked?
Well, I'm almost sure that I wouldn't, because I'm very sure that they cannot have mass success, a success among the masses.
Why no success with the, excuse me, why no success in your viewpoint with the masses?
Well, because the American Negro is a complete development of the Negro Christian religion. And of course, anything that is not this, I don't feel could merit widespread Negro support.
Mr. Meredith, this is just about the last question we have time for, and I was wondering whether you could tell us, in your own personal opinion, do you think that bloodshed is inevitable here in the United States between white and Negro Americans?
I'm very sure that major bloodshed is not a possibility between Negroes and whites, but it's a great possibility between whites and whites. Very great.
Between whites and whites?
That's right. Very
How do you
great.
explain that, sir?
Well, because the same reason why the Civil War was fought. I mean, the whites at one level say that above this we will not go. The whites at another level say below this we will not go. When we reach this, then the country has no alternative but to fight.
Well, I wish we had time for more questions, but this moment of frustration, we've run out of time and come to the close of today's program.